So in this session, we'll talk about the different types of feedback, how important feedback is, and how to evaluate your performance in a bike race or in a training session. So I'm just going to share my PowerPoint with you guys now. Sharing screen. Entire screen. Share. Bear with me a second. And that's sharing now. So I'm just going to put that on the screen. So feedback and race analysis is the topic for this week. I'm going to start by talking a bit about feedback. So what is feedback? Well, feedback is, in its definition terms, is information about reactions to a product, a person's performance of a task, which is used as a basis for improvement. Now, that is very wordy, but basically what it means is how we respond to or how we feel about a task or a performance or something. So, for example, if you're giving feedback on a product, you'd let somebody know that whether you think it was good, whether you think it worked and did its job, and how it could be improved. So that is the same with giving feedback on a training session. So you let people know how you felt in that training session, but you can also say, oh, well, this bit was hard or this bit was easy. And we'll talk a bit about specific feedback for training and racing a bit later on. So why is feedback important? There's many reasons that feedback is important. For future improvement is one of them. So without feedback, especially towards like a coach, it's really hard for the coach to then know what you're struggling with and then adapt your training to make those improvements in the future. If you don't give any feedback, then nobody knows whether what you're doing is actually working or not. So that's why feedback can be really important in future development. It also helps to increase the understanding. So that helps the coach to understand a bit more. So about how you're feeling, whether you need to rest a bit more, whether you're not training hard enough and you need more demanding sessions. And it also helps you with your understanding. So your understanding of what your training is, why you're doing it, and understanding your own body. And if you keep giving feedback, you'll start to understand when a hard session is just hard or when it's too hard and you might be struggling a bit too much, if that makes sense. It also ensures communication with your coach or your team. Giving feedback means that there's that constant open communication channel between you and whoever's helping. So that could be your coach, your teammate, it could be a nutritionist, it could be anybody that is there to help your cycling journey. And giving them feedback allows them to develop their response to whatever you need. And the more feedback you give to somebody, the better they can understand you and the better they can help you improve in the future. It also allows your opinions to be discussed. So giving feedback on whether you thought a session worked for you or it didn't, then that gives you a point to discuss with your coach or whoever and say, well, this way of working, for example, this sort of sprint session doesn't work for me. Can we do it somewhere else? Or can we do it in a slightly different way? So that's why it can be quite important to get the most out of your training and also be quite clear and be able to be open and feel comfortable. If you don't feed back, you can get into a bit of a situation where you're like, oh, I felt really, really rubbish in that session and I'm just not very good. But actually, it could be that your coach has set a session that you do the same session for 3 weeks. And the first week, you can only do the first block. But over time, as you're improving, you'll be able to complete more and more of that session. And then by the end of it, you'll be able to complete that whole session. So that's why being able to discuss things with your coach or other people is really important. So now we're going to move on to who needs feedback. So who do you give this feedback to? So we've already mentioned about your coach to help them to ensure your training is correct, to help them know whether you're ill or whether you're feeling unwell and you might need to back off your training a bit so they can adapt your training to how you're feeling. Your coach can also need feedback to make sure that they know why something's happened. So, for example, if you've not been able to complete a session because it was too hard, then they know that they need to edit that session or change their approach a little bit. Or also just general feedback of, I didn't do this because something came up, just so that your coach is aware, and then they can always edit things to make sure that your coaching is as good as possible for you. Your team might need to know about feedback, need some feedback, because to make sure that your race day runs well. So the team, for example, our team, we send out a feedback form after every race, and the team then come back to us and say, oh, well, I thought this went really well. If there was any issues or anything that we missed, they'll let us know, and it means that we can improve our performance and improve our help that we can give to the team while we're racing. So that's really important. Who else needs feedback? You need to give yourself feedback, so you can understand whether something's working or whether something's not. This is especially important when you're talking about racing, because racing feedback is the sort of stuff that you might not necessarily always share with a coach. Ideally you will, but there might be something like a certain corner on a circuit that you notice that you need to work better, get better at your cornering on, and it's just something that you need to feed back to yourself and say, oh, I was struggling with this, just so you make a mental note of it. So that's the sort of people that need to know and need to be fed back to after a coaching session or a race. What does feedback do? So as I said earlier, it speeds up your progression. So that means that if you're feeding back to your coach can then see that you've done a session, and they'll know why you've done it, and then they'll know if there are any issues. So your training can be edited more quickly. So you're not going a week of being ill trying to do sessions that you shouldn't be doing. You're allowing that week of recovery, so you're not actually missing out on any training, rather than leaving it and going, a week later, I'm still ill. So you end up missing another week of training, and then your progression is delayed. It also helps you not make the same mistake twice. So when you feed back, it makes you think about what went well and what's you're not going so well. So, for example, if a training session doesn't work for you, if you just leave it, your coach won't know, so they'll put it back in again, and you'll keep making that same mistake and keep not doing that session. Whereas if you feed back to your coach, look, I really struggle mentally with this session or whatever, then they can edit that, and then you won't have that session, so you won't have to deal with that repetitive failure. It also helps you with learning for the future, because again, you're thinking more about how a session went, why it went well, what it was doing. So you know for future reference, these sessions work, this race tactic has worked, this isn't so good, and then you can kind of learn from it. It also ensures everyone's on the same page. As I said earlier, if you don't tell your coach you're ill, they'll keep setting you training and you'll keep failing to complete it. So it's really important to keep all the people that are trying to help you on the same page. Otherwise, you'll just be sat there. You'll be upset because you're not able to complete the training. Your coach will be frustrated because they don't understand why you're not completing the training when you've not told them you're ill. So it's just a constant cycle of nobody really understanding what's happening. So there's a lot on this slide, but it's talking about types of feedback. So start with the obvious, positive feedback. So that's saying what went well. So what went well with the training session? I completed it all. I hit the power numbers, things like that. With a race, I got a good result. I was positioned in the right place in the bunch, things like that. Negatives, things that went badly. So, I missed the break today. I didn't drink enough. Again, with training, it's, I could only manage 2 out of the 3 blocks in the training session, or I wasn't feeling very well. There are some sort of examples of negative feedback. Intrinsic or kinesthetic feedback is about how you physically feel. So that's, my legs were really heavy today. I felt really fresh. I could have gone harder. I went too hard. That's the sort of feedback that is intrinsic or kinesthetic. Extrinsic feedback is received from others. Oh, well, I saw you attack today and that looked really good. I saw you were positioned correctly in the bunch. Your pedaling technique was really nice. Something like that somebody has watched from the outside and has let you know. In terms of that, knowledge of results is your outcomes. So that's, I won the race. I came third. That is very factual. Knowledge of performance is about technique. So this will be more prominent in training. So if, for example, you race cyclocross, it could be, I'm getting better at bunny hopping the hurdles, or I need to improve on my mounting and dismounting. For the track, it could be, I need to improve on the smoothness of my pedaling, or I need to improve on the explosivity of my power. Things like that is technique-based, not necessarily results-based. So they're the different types of feedback we have. And here we're going to go on to talking about qualities of good feedback. So what makes feedback good? Making it specific. So that is making sure it's related to the exact session or a specific part of that session that you're doing, or the race. So there's no point in saying the race went well. It's not just specific enough. So you can't really learn from that. Saying, my positioning into the final corner was really good is very specific. It's also descriptive. So descriptive just means that it gives you enough information that you know a large amount about it. So in that example, you've got I was positioned well. You've got where it was, so into the final corner, and then you can also add what that meant. So therefore, I did better in the sprint. Honesty. There's no point in coming out of a race and saying, oh yeah, I did really well. My numbers were really good, all of it and all of that, if you didn't do well and you weren't happy with it. So you need to be honest. The same goes the other way. If you've finished in the bunch and everybody else has finished in the bunch and they've gone, oh, I'm not very happy, I only finished in the bunch, didn't manage to sprint. And you say, oh, I'm not very happy. But in actual fact, that's the first time you've ever finished in the bunch. It's not being honest with yourself, and it's trying to conform with everybody else. And that doesn't help with the feedback because it doesn't make it related to you. Also productive. So there's no point in saying, I was rubbish in that race and just leaving it at that. You need to figure out what went wrong. So, I was positioned badly, I was at the back. Or I didn't drink enough, so I cramped. If you think about feedback in a way that it can be productive so that you can learn from it and then not repeat the same mistake, then that is really good quality feedback. Also inquisitive. So feedback doesn't necessarily have to be, I think this happened or I feel like this. It can also be feedback in terms of learning. So, for example, I'm struggling with riding around right-hand turns. So asking, what can I do to improve on this is also a way of feeding back. So you say, I've got this issue. How can I resolve this? So that's why being inquisitive and thinking, what can I do to improve the thing that I'm feeding back about is really important. So training feedback. Here's a couple of examples of what sort of feedback you can give when you're training or to your coach about your training. So how the session went. Did it go well? Did it go badly? And then think about why it went well or why it went badly. What part of it was good? What part of it was bad? You might have a session where half of it was really good and then at the end you just couldn't manage it. So you could have a bit of good and bad. Again, we talked about how it felt kinesthetically, but the muscle feel, so how your legs feel, but also how your lungs feel, because sometimes they might not necessarily relate. So you might have really good legs, but your breathing just can't keep up, and the same the other way around. You could be riding your bike and doing an effort and feeling like you're not breathing at all, but your legs are absolutely dead. So that can be really helpful for a coach, because then they can understand whether it's a lack of fitness, for example, if you're aerobically struggling, but your muscles are fine, or a lack of strength in your muscles, or fatigue, if your muscles are struggling, but you're aerobically fine. Also, letting your coach know if you're unable to complete a session and why you think that might be. It might not necessarily be something in your control. You might just say, I just felt tired and I couldn't do it. And then your coach will then be able to respond to that and give you a bit more of a in-depth insight as to why they think that might be. It's also really important to feedback about training if it's too easy. Because if it's too easy, yes, okay, you might be able to complete all the sessions, but you won't be able to progress as quickly or at all. If you're doing the same thing and not putting stress on your body, you're not going to improve. So it's really important that you feedback if you're finding sessions too easy. Does it work for you? As I said earlier, some sessions just don't work for certain people. I remember there was one session that I always used to get set. It was called the Hour of Power, and I really struggled. I absolutely hated it. Every time I saw it on my plan, my head would drop, and I'd just be like, no, I just don't want to do it. And I'd try it every time, and every time it just wouldn't happen. And it took me ages to feed back with my coach. But once I fed back to my coach that I just couldn't do it, and I dreaded the session, they were like, well, there's no point in putting a session that you're going to dread on your training plan, because you're not going to do it, and it's just going to like linger over you all week. So it's better to change it and adapt it to something that's similar, and trains the similar systems but in a different way. It's also really important to talk about if there's any pain or symptoms of illness, because what we don't want to do is cause any injury or long-term illness. We want to make sure that our body can recover, because as important as training is, the recovery is just as important. So it's really important that you feedback about that, so that we can back off your training until you're better, or give you examples of or options of how to deal with things. Like, for example, if you've got a knee pain, your coach might suggest going to see a bike fitter or something like that. So it's really important that we kind of share that feedback. External stresses, a lot of you guys will be doing exams, so that's a massive stress, and that is something that coaches really need to know, because your training might be a really low load, but it might be really, really hard for you to complete when you're also having to try and juggle revision and exams and things like that. And external stress does take a massive toll on you. Trying to do everything all at once is never good. That's why it can be hard, like working with a work-life balance, because you don't really realise how much energy, even if you're just sat down all day, it actually takes out of you, because it's the mental stress, not necessarily the physical exertion. Also, situational changes. Things change. Nothing's ever... You might be able to plan out everything in advance, but something might come up. You might have an accident. Something your pet might get loose. It could be something as simple as that, but something that means that you can't complete a session, or something that means that you can't get out for as long as you intended to. But as long as you communicate that with your coach, it allows the training to be adapted and your training to be as best as it can be. So I'm just going to stop sharing my screen now. And if you have any questions, please just drop them into the chat. Any questions at all? Not one question. I'm sure there must be somebody with a question. Oh, I can see Hugh's typing now. Anybody else? It can be about anything to do with feedback. Anything that you think that you might need to feedback that I've not mentioned. or anything that you're concerned about. So Hugh's just asked, is it necessary to give feedback on every session? It's not necessary, but it can be helpful to your coach. So, for example, if you go and do a recovery ride, and you've just literally ridden your hour recovery ride, really easy, and it's fine. You don't necessarily need feedback. Well, again, as Hugh's just asked, if it's a normal Zone 2 base ride. So, yeah, same thing applies. You can either just drop a comment on your coaching and just say, went well, or if not, it can just be left as it is. It's up to you. It's managing the feedbacks so that it's enough that your coach kind of knows where you're at, but not so much that you feel like it's taking a lot of time. It doesn't have to be like a massive essay after every session. It could literally be like 2 words. It doesn't necessarily matter, but giving feedback regularly on the key training sessions of a week, for example, can really help a coach. Any more questions? I can't see anybody else typing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the second half of the presentation. So I'm going to go back to sharing my screen, and then I'll take some more questions at the end. So I'm going to share my screen again. Just bear with me a second. Perfect. So next we're going to talk a bit about race evaluation. So there's a difference between feedback and evaluation. So again, this is a bit of a wordy slide, but feedback is information delivered with the sole aim of improving performance, irrespective of the current level of performance. So feedback is purely information. It's how you can improve, how you can get better. But it doesn't take into account how you're doing at the moment, if that makes sense. Whereas evaluation is a judgment often compared to others and does not inherently improve performance. So evaluation is, was it good or was it not? Evaluating is seeing where the good parts were, where the bad parts were, but it might not necessarily lead to a direct improvement, but it's picking out the areas for improvement, if that makes sense. And seeing how your results stack up to other people, or in this case, it'll be seeing how your race results stack up to previous race results. So a race evaluation, it starts with feedback. So you need feedback and think about what went well and how you can improve. But also you need to choose your positives and your negatives. So for race evaluation, for me, I always used to have a little notebook with me at a race. And after the race, I'd just write down 3 things that went well. So 3 positives from the race and 3 negatives. Some races where I did really well, it's really hard to find some negatives. And again, the same with the opposite. So if you had a really bad race, it can be quite hard to find positives. But doing this makes it a bit easier, and it makes you, if you've had a good race, it makes you also think how it could have been better. And if you had a bad race, it also helps you kind of pick you up and say, yeah, okay, I might not have got the result I wanted, but I was in a really good position at the finish. I just ended up getting cut up into the final corner or whatever. Situations. So race evaluation sort of help is when you have a look at this situation specifically. So it's related to one race. It's not an overview of how training is going in as a whole, or how racing is going as a whole. It's related to specific situations. And race evaluation is where you pick out those specific situations within a race and give feedback on them. So, for example, at the back end of the course, there was a really tight corner and I really struggled with getting the right line around it. And that made me lose 10 places on this lap, for example. It also helps you to think about how things could have been prevented. So, for example, if you got dropped in a race, you can think of, well, why did I get dropped? Oh, well, you're at the back and you never saw the front of the race. So every time you went through a corner, there was that elastic effect and you were really struggling and you're having to work twice as hard as those people at the front. So it could have been prevented by
positioning and positioning better, for example. Race evaluation is also a chance to compare to previous results. So what might be a good race result for somebody might be a bad race result for somebody else. So, for example, if you've got the world champion going into a bike race and he comes 10th, that's not a great result. If you've got somebody who's just stepped up to race at that level and they've come 10th, it might be the best result they've ever had. So it's really important to compare, to use your previous race results to help get a valid evaluation of your race. Because for some people, just getting around in the bunch might be an amazing result. For other people, that might be a bad day. So it's really important that you compare it to your own personal level at that current moment. It's also good to think about, is there improvement? This could be a technical improvement. Was your positioning better? Did you feed better? Was your cornering better? Things like that. It could also be something as simple as, did you do a better result? Did you get a better result? Did you manage to stay in a breakaway? And things like that. It can be a whole host of different things. It also gives you a chance to think about if there's anything that needs to be changed. For example, if you've tried something new, so you might have tried a caffeine gel just before the start and got halfway through and felt really, really poorly. And that could just be because it's something that doesn't work for you. So you might need to change that for the next race and go, right, okay, we're not going to do that anymore. The same could go for clothing choices. It could go for anything. But it's just making sure you pick out if there's anything that needs to be changed in the future to help improve your racing. There's also team race feedback in the form of a debrief. So this will typically follow a structure such as the following. So it'll be a DS will give them an overview of the race from their point of view, so what they've seen from the side of the road or in the team car. So they'll basically say how each rider did and how the team performed as a whole. And then they'll give riders individual feedback on what they thought from what they could see from the outside, how they thought the rider performed, and anything that was missed, and kind of then open it up to the floor so that the riders can then feed back to the DS and say, oh, well, we thought this went well. The reason this didn't happen was because of this. But it also helps to start a conversation and helps the team to become an open space for sharing information about the race and feedback to each other. So this is, for example, the riders' input on how the team worked. So whether the teamwork was good and the strategy was correct, whether they achieved what they set out to achieve, and if there was any discrepancy in what actually happened to what the race plan was. This is used to try and be constructive. So admittedly, it's straight after a race, so your emotions will be running high. But all the feedback given in a race debrief is to be constructive. It's trying to help people. So it's really important that if you're in a debrief, you kind of realise that, yes, okay, people might have done badly, or people might have done well, or they might have been frustrated at a certain thing that happened. But it's really important that we take the feedback as constructive and not an attack. So, for example, if one of the riders failed to execute part of the team plan, and another rider picked up on that, it's understanding that they're only feeding it back so that the team can improve as a whole, rather than to have a specific dig at that certain rider. It's really important as well that you use the positive before the negative, because especially if you've had a bad race, it can be really, really demoralising. The mood in the team can be quite low. So giving some positives and thinking about some improvements that have happened before talking about what went badly can be a really nice way of doing it to help lift the mood a little bit. It's a time for self-reflection, but it's also a time to feedback to others. someone might have seen something that another rider hadn't realised, and it can be quite good to give feedback to people. And it can also do quite a good job of building people up, especially if they're not very confident themselves. For example, in some of our team debriefs, we've had riders saying, "Oh, well, your wheel was great to follow. I really enjoyed seeing you at the front of the group because I knew I had a marker to aim for," and things like that. So it can also give people a lot of reassurance and a lot of confidence. It also helps the team to understand what the riders are capable of, and also how each rider works individually. The feedback will always be objective, so they're not feeding back on wishy-washy things. That it's always, this happened, it's a fact. It's not oh well, this is something that sort of might have happened. It is factual, and it helps improve the team understanding. So, for example, if somebody didn't execute something, and when they're asked in the debrief why they didn't, and they said, "Oh well, I didn't quite understand the brief," then it helps the team to understand, actually, we need to be clearer for future races. So, personal race feedback. So I spoke a little bit about this earlier. So after your race, if you get a notebook or a piece of paper, or even like your notes app on your phone, if that works for you, it doesn't matter what it is, but just make sure you note down 3 things that went well, 3 things that could be improved, and then any notes just for future reference, so you know what the race was. If there was anything about the course that you might want to think about, oh well, although there's a big hill on this side of the course, the race actually tends to split up on the other side of the course where it's a bit more rolling, but the pace is higher. Things like that for if you race that same circuit again in the future, so that you know how it rides. Sometimes you might never look at these notes again, but it makes you think about it again after the race, and it helps you stop making those mistakes. Because if you have a look in your little notebook at the past 4 races, you've had the same negative feedback points of, oh, my positioning was bad, my positioning was bad, my positioning was bad, then you know that that's what you need to work on. So it makes it quite clear, if you're making the same mistake multiple times, what it is that you need to work on. It's also a really good thing to look back on in the future. Like, could you imagine having every race you've ever raced in a little notebook, and then you can flick through it and have a look, and it's like, oh, I remember that race, that was really good, or I forgot that happened in that race, but I can remember it now. And it's just quite a nice memory as well as a useful tool. So that's everything for this evening's webinar. Thanks for listening, and I'm just going to stop sharing my screen now and welcome any questions from you guys about feedback, about team debriefs, about who you should tell, about what you might need to talk about, how to give some constructive feedback, anything like that. So I can see Harrison's typing. I'm sure we've got more than one question. Anybody else got any more questions? Surely. Here we go. Harrison, should you give personal feedback as soon as possible or like an hour afterwards? It depends on the situation. I think if your emotions are high, it is quite good to leave it a little bit and just let yourself process what's happened before you give the feedback. But for example, if it's a training session, personal feedback. So personal feedback, again, if emotions are high, maybe it's worth leaving it a bit longer and giving it a bit later. But yeah, it's just personal preference, and it depends on how your emotions are to whether you should give that feedback straight away or whether you should leave it a little bit longer. It's one of those situationally dependent things. But with general feedback, I'd recommend giving your feedback as soon as possible. So, for example, if you're doing a training session, as soon as you finish the training session, just put a comment at the bottom of how it went. For the personal feedback notes, you can do that whenever. Same day would be better because at least then you can remember it. If you leave it a couple of days, then you're not going to necessarily remember the race as clearly as you do straight afterwards. But I appreciate that after a race, you've got a lot of other things going on that you might not have a chance to just sit down and write in a book. So, yeah. And then Owen's got a question. Oh, thanks for the advice at the weekend. No worries, Owen. Again, this was one of our first opportunities for our team to experience what we've just been talking about, the debriefs and the feedback. And I think over the weekend, they realised about how important feedback is and how much it can help, because having a conversation is the best way to feedback. Even if you just leave comments, it's better than nothing, but having an actual conversation and being able to talk through things can really, really help. So if you have the opportunity with your coach or with your team or whoever to feedback in the form of a conversation, it is really, really helpful. So thank you all for joining us tonight. So I hope you've taken away how important feedback is, what different types of feedback are, and the difference between feedback and evaluation, and how you can then implement this into your own race routines or training routines so you get the most out of yourself and your training. Next week, we'll be having a bit more of a step back in time to about an introduction to road racing. So this is talking about what to put in your kit bag, where to race in the UK, what sort of road races you should be looking at dependent on your experience and ability, and things like that. So I look forward to seeing you guys next week. Thank you for tuning in this week, especially because I know it's Easter holidays. So a lot of you will be off school. And I look forward to seeing you all next week. Thanks, guys.